What if the most mysterious secrets weren't locked in books, but buried in stone, sand, and silence? Could a forgotten village, a sealed temple, or a sunken coin still carry voices from the past? And what if you've been carrying a sundial without ever knowing? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where we uncover the strangest truths archaeology can't explain. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's begin. The sundial no one knew they carried. They never expected it to matter. When it first came out of the earth, quietly, without ceremony, it was just another artifact among dozens. A small thing, a curve of metal the color of old leaves, worn at the edges, uneven, one side still sticky with soil, the kind of thing you might toss in a tray to study later. Or maybe not at all. It didn't sparkle. It wasn't shaped like a coin or jewelry or anything obviously useful. But it had weight. Not in grams or ounces, but in feeling. The kind of weight that makes you pause. They turned it over in gloved fingers. No inscriptions, no maker's mark, no gilded edge or evidence of ritual. And yet, it had been made. Intentionally, lovingly, even. Carved with fine, shallow lines. A curved piece with just enough shape to suggest purpose, but not enough to give it away. There were two tiny holes, one at each end. That was the clue. And then someone quietly asked the question, what if this was a sundial? Not one mounted in stone, fixed in the middle of a Roman garden or atop a pillar in some forum, but something smaller, simpler, made to move, made to be carried. Something you could lift in your palm and turn to the sun, just for a moment, and know exactly how much day you had left. The idea felt strange at first. We don't often think of ancient people in terms of personal timekeeping. Sundials belonged in public spaces, in the centers of cities, under the sky, in grand courtyards, designed to impress. But this was different. Not grand at all. Just useful, quietly useful. The lines carved into its face weren't decorative. They were deliberate. Vertical ones, straight as reeds, horizontal, spaced unevenly but with care. It wasn't symmetrical. It didn't need to be. Some guessed the vertical lines might correspond to months. The horizontal lines, to the movement of the sun. A slow dance across the sky, mapped in shadow. If you held it just right, let the light fall clean across its face, it would whisper the hour. A pocket sundial, from Rome, 2,000 years old, carried maybe on a leather cord, hung from a belt, swung from a traveler's pack as he moved from town to town. The more you think about it, the more real it becomes. You can picture someone waking with the sun, tightening the strap on their sandals, collecting their pack, their water, and this little piece of bronze. They step into the morning light. The day is new. The road is long, but they pause. They lift this curved thing in their hand. Let the sun strike it. Watch the shadow fall. Maybe it tells them there's time for a quick stop in the next village. Or maybe it says they'll need to camp early tonight, before the light fades. Maybe it's nothing more than a habit. Maybe it's comfort. Familiar, known, it's beautiful in its simplicity. And yet there's a deeper question. Why have we never found another one? Not a second. Not a fragment. Not a single drawing or mention in a surviving Roman text. Just this one. That, more than anything, makes it feel lonely, singular, like someone made it for themselves. Not for the market, not for others, just for them. You can imagine the craftsman, bent over a workbench in a small corner shop, melting down bronze, pouring it into a mold, shaving the edges, not for show, but for precision. Maybe they had to guess the spacing of the hours based on the latitude of their home. Maybe they tested it in the street, turning it to the sun and adjusting the lines with a chisel. There was trial and error, surely. This wasn't mass-produced. It was personal, experimental. One person trying to solve the problem of time in their own quiet way. That thought of someone trying to carry time with them is haunting. We live surrounded by clocks now, on our walls, in our pockets, on our wrists. The rhythm of minutes and seconds pulses through everything we do. But in the Roman world, time was different. It was slower, looser, marked by bells and sunlight, shadows and footsteps, the calling of vendors, the tolling of temple chimes. The sun told the day, the stars told the night. Schedules were measured not by numbers, but by habits, by memory. And into that world, someone slipped a sundial into their pocket. A small rebellion against vagueness. A quiet attempt at certainty. You wonder about their life. Were they a soldier, stationed far from home, marching under strange skies? and wanting some small anchor, a merchant crossing provinces, measuring daylight to make the next deal, a scholar, curious, thoughtful, observing the world, and needing a tool to track its pace. Whoever they were, they carried time differently. Maybe they used it every day, maybe only when they were unsure, maybe it wasn't always accurate, but that didn't matter. It was theirs. It gave them a moment of control, a way to answer the question we all still ask: how much longer do I have? It's a human question, ancient, universal, and maybe that's why this artifact speaks so clearly, even across centuries, because we recognize it, not in shape or material, but in meaning. There's something intimate about forgotten tools, not the ceremonial objects, the things meant for ritual or display, but the everyday things, the ones meant to be used, worn, handled, the ones with smoothed edges, faded lines, fingerprints worn into the surface. Those are the ones that carry stories we'll never fully know. This sundial wasn't buried with honor. It wasn't placed in a tomb, or wrapped in silk. It was lost, maybe, dropped, or hidden, or simply left behind. No one wrote about it. No one saved it. Time buried it the way it buries everything. Slowly, carelessly, without malice. And then we found it, pulled it back into the light, cleaned it with brushes and air, and stared, because here was time, returned to us. In the museum, it sits beneath glass. Now, clean, numbered, described. But the glass can't explain it. No label can say for certain what it meant. All we have are questions. And the most haunting one remains. If it worked, where did it go? Why didn't this idea spread? Why wasn't it copied, perfected? Or maybe it was. Maybe there were more, made in towns we haven't uncovered, in ruins beneath farmland and cities and seas. Maybe we're standing in buildings right now, raised over pockets of earth that still hold others like it. Still waiting, still ticking. There's a temptation to romanticize this piece, to imagine it as mystical, prophetic, magical. But that would be unfair, because its power isn't in myth. Its power is in how ordinary it is. It's a human object, and that, above all, is what makes it so profound. It reminds us that the past was not populated by strangers, but by people who were busy, uncertain, tired, hopeful. People who wanted to know how much time they had left in a day, so they could plan the next thing. Eat, rest, work, meet someone, leave, return. It's not about the device itself. It's about what they did after checking it. The silence around this artifact isn't empty. It's full of footsteps, conversations, sky, dust, wind through linen robes, coins clinking in purses, the sound of cartwheels, the hush of sandals over dirt. It carries the smell of olive groves, the sweat of long travel, the shimmer of heat rising from stone. And somewhere in that landscape, someone no different from you reaches into their bag, feels the curve of metal, lifts it gently, angles it to the sun, watches the shadow fall, and in that moment, they know something. Not just the hour, but what that hour means. When you hold this object now, centuries later, you're not just holding bronze, you're holding rhythm, intention, memory. And maybe that's the strangest thing about archaeology, the way time folds in on itself. Because even though this little sundial hasn't ticked in 2,000 years, it just marked another hour, right now, in your imagination. The island the locals still fear to name. They don't mark it on maps anymore. At least, not the ones tourists see, not on weather apps or nautical charts passed out at the marina. If you asked 5 locals where the island was, 3 would pretend not to know, 1 would give you a name that doesn't match any satellite view, and the last would pause, lips thin, eyes narrowing, and simply say, "We don't go there." There is an island, just beyond the edge of the coast, 12 miles out, maybe less, though distance plays tricks on the water. On calm days, it sits low and green, and oddly symmetrical, its tree line forming a broken halo above its shores. But on most days, it's hard to see. Fog clings to it, tides push you away, even birds seem to change course mid-flight when they near it. Some say the island moves, others say it disappears. A few swear it's never been there at all, but it is. The records say so. Old shipping logs, grainy black and white photos from naval archives, annotated journals from botanists and surveyors, long dead. Before it vanished from modern charts, it had several names. Most were unremarkable. Point 9b, Eastern Ledge, Gallon's Rise. But in a set of fragile handwritten sea diaries dating to 1792, it was called something else. translated loosely from an old sailor's dialect, as the island the locals still fear to name. It's not clear when the name stopped being spoken. Perhaps it was gradual, like erosion, a tide of silence rising year by year, until there was only a blank where the word had once been. But the silence is deep. Ask around, and you'll find no postcards, no t-shirts, no local legends printed on coffee mugs. And yet, if you linger in the right corners, listen to the way the old people pause when asked about certain coastal currents, you might catch the edge of it. A place they don't name, but don't quite forget. It begins with whispers. The first references aren't even about the island itself. They're about boats, fishing boats found drifting with nets untouched, hulls scraped as if they'd been dragged. Logbooks showing courses that changed mid-sail, crewmen who leapt overboard with no explanation. Those entries stretch back nearly 300 years, always with similar phrasing: something wrong with the tide, fog came in all at once, sea felt hollow beneath us. And then, always, some note of confusion. We saw a light, heard bells, smell of ash in the air. A pattern forms, boats that turn back too early, or arrive too late, compasses that spin, radio silence. And more rarely, stories from those who claim to have landed. There's one account, buried in the archives of an old New England museum, barely legible, that tells of a botanist named Edward Leary, who joined a short-lived expedition to chart the island's interior. The date is uncertain, either 1911 or 1913, but the journal is unmistakably his. The entries begin confidently, describing lush plant life, odd variations in soil composition, and birds that sing as if underwater. But by the fifth day, the handwriting changes. The margins are filled with corrections and crossouts. He writes, "The island turns in on itself, and the trees do not cast shadows in the way they should." He makes repeated references to rooms without walls, and sketches of staircases that lead nowhere. On the seventh day, there is only one phrase, written over and over again: "It's not where we left it." Leary was never seen again. Nor were the 5 men with him. Locals say the sea took them. Others whisper about the bell. This is the sound many describe first, not the island itself, not the sight of it rising dark and still from the water, but the sound of a bell tolling faintly, though no one has ever found a structure on the island tall enough to hang one. It comes irregularly, not tied to wind or tide, sometimes echoing across the water in the middle of a cloudless afternoon, sometimes just before a storm. Some say it rings in threes, others swear it's just once. But everyone agrees, it doesn't belong. And yet, a few still go. Not locals, usually. Outsiders. Photographers looking for the untouched, urban explorers hoping to find forgotten buildings, paranormal investigators with gear that beeps and clicks and never quite records what it's supposed to. They rent a boat. They pack carefully. They smile and make jokes at the dock, and then they go out, and the fog comes in behind them, and the water folds closed. Most return, changed, but whole. They talk about how quickly the island rises. One moment, nothing but mist and water. The next, a thick wall of green. They say the trees are too still, that the forest is silent, that no birds sing. They speak of paths that branch and merge, of clearings that weren't there an hour before, of an uncanny sense of being watched, not by animals, not by people, but by the island itself. One woman, a travel writer named Shireen, spent 6 hours on the island in 2007. She had gone alone, confident, with backup gear and GPS. When she returned, she was pale, quiet. It wasn't until months later that she wrote about what she'd seen. Her article, eventually pulled by the magazine that commissioned it, described what she called folded time. According to her, the sun looped twice in the same sky. She walked in a straight line but returned to the same tree 3 times. At one point, she followed the sound of her own voice, recorded earlier on a dictaphone, as it echoed through the trees. She described standing in a clearing, where dozens of cairns, small stacks of stones had been arranged in spirals, and in the center, a single glass jar, sealed and empty. She never opened it. When asked why she didn't take a photo, she said, "I tried, but the screen only showed the forest behind me, nothing in front." Others have spoken of similar displacements of clocks that stop, shadows that shift the wrong way, voices heard but never seen. Some have heard crying, some have seen footprints begin before their own, and always the bell. But perhaps the strangest account comes not from an adventurer or scientist, but from a boy named Elias, who lived in the coastal town just opposite the island. In 1984, he vanished for 3 days during summer break. Search teams scoured the beaches, combed the cliffs, even sent a boat toward the fog. Nothing. Then, on the fourth day, Elias walked back into town, barefoot, sunburned, and holding a smooth round stone in each hand. He was 8 years old. When asked where he'd been, he said simply, "I was inside the trees." He couldn't or wouldn't explain further. Doctors examined him. He was unharmed, unafraid. But he spoke little afterward, except in his sleep. Night after night, he would murmur the same words. "Don't step on the roots," they remember. After a few months, the dreams stopped. He grew up, moved away, changed his name. But he never let go of those stones, and he never once returned to the sea. Now and then, rumors resurface. Government expeditions, secretive studies, drones that lost signal mid-flight. But no official organization acknowledges the island anymore. It's as if a line was drawn, not on any map, but in the quiet agreement of those who live nearby. Let it be. Let it sit in its fog. Let the bell ring when it wants to. Let the roots remember. Because deep down, some part of them still believes it isn't just land, it's something older, something coiled in waiting. Not evil, perhaps, not malicious, but aware, and watching. There are theories, of course. Some say it's a thin place, where the veil between worlds wears thinner than skin. Others think it's the remnant of something forgotten. A civilization folded in on itself, lost to time and grief and silence. There are those who claim the island was never truly an island at all, but a ship, or a temple, or the dreaming body of something that never died. But the island doesn't offer answers, only the fog, and the green, and the pull. And so, it waits. To some, it's a wound. To others, a gate. To most, just a blank on a map, where something should be, but isn't. And maybe that's all it needs to be. Still, if you go walking by the shore, especially near dusk, you might feel it. A sound, deep and low, almost too soft to name. A bell, far off, as if underwater. The tide may shift, the gulls may scatter, and for a moment, out past the mist, you may see it. The island, the locals still fear to name. And if you do, you'll understand why they don't. The temple door that refuses to open. They say time wears down even the hardest stone. That wind over centuries can smooth mountains. That water can carve valleys where none existed. But not here. Not at the base of this hill, hidden by a forest that no longer appears on modern maps. Not at the edge of the ruins where the door still stands, tall, silent and shut, just as it has stood for as long as anyone can remember. No one knows who built the temple. No name, no date, no inscription. Just the door. It's not even the kind of place you'd stumble upon by accident. The old road that once led here has long been overtaken by roots and moss and time. You must walk carefully, listening for things you're not sure you heard, watching the trees bend in directions. Trees don't usually bend. There is no path, just a quiet sense that something is nearby waiting. You'll know you're close when the air changes. It's hard to explain. It's not colder, exactly, but it's still denser. Like sound itself becomes heavy. Even the birds go quiet. And then, through the last thicket of trees, you'll see it. The top edge of the stonework rising from the earth, like the spine of something enormous and sleeping. It's not a grand temple by size. Not like the colossal ziggurats or vast Egyptian sanctuaries. This one is modest, as temples go, barely 2 stories tall and square in shape. But its presence, its weight, is something else entirely. The stones are smooth, impossibly so, as if they weren't carved but poured like liquid and hardened mid-form. No mortar, no seams, just clean, seamless faces of dark, green-black stone that drink in light and offer nothing back. And at its center the door. It's the only visible entrance. No windows, no side gates. Just that one rectangular slab, set perfectly flush with the frame, ringed by subtle markings that are neither letters nor pictures, but something in between. Some say they move when you're not looking. Others say they hum in certain weather. But always, the door stays closed. Many have tried to open it. The earliest recorded attempts go back nearly 1,000 years. Scrolls from the nearby village, now long gone, speak of pilgrims who gathered under the stars to offer prayers before the door. They brought incense, chants, even blood. Nothing happened. Later came the scholars, antiquarians and monks who mapped every angle, measured every inch and catalogued the strange symbols. Some believed it was a tomb. Others thought it was a portal to another realm. But none could breach it. They knocked. They pressed. They waited. One even lived in a tent beside it for 12 years, claiming he heard whispers at night, words too soft to remember by morning. When he vanished, they found his tent intact, his books left open, his shoes beside the fire, but no sign of him, just a new mark on the door, faint, like a breath left on glass. Centuries passed. The forest thickened. The village was abandoned. The maps changed, but the door remained, untouched, unopened, unaged. Then came the modern age. Archaeologists, armed with ground-penetrating radar, arrived in trucks and boots and confidence. They scanned and measured and drilled discrete holes in the soil. What they found disturbed them beneath the door. The stone continued, not a shallow facade, but a shaft that descended, seemingly without end. No chamber, no foundation, just more of that same seamless stone, extending down into the earth like the finger of some buried god. They brought machines, tried to force the door. Lasers, acids, vibrations. Nothing worked, not a scratch. One drill shattered on contact, another simply stopped, its operator swearing he heard music, faint and hollow, coming from the bit just before it failed. The project was quietly shut down. That was decades ago. The temple was left alone again. The jungle reclaimed the road. The stone darkened, and the door did not change, but the stories did. Whispers began to circle, among certain circles, not academics, but those who trafficked in rarer knowledge. Mystics, wanderers, people with more questions than answers. They spoke of a door that marked not a place, but a decision, a fixed point in space where possibility collapsed into certainty, a door that opens only when the world is ready to receive what's inside, or when it's too late to stop it. One such wanderer, a quiet woman known only as Aaliyah, came in the spring of the year. The river flooded twice. She didn't bring equipment, only a lantern, a satchel of dried herbs, and a book bound in bark. She arrived at the temple just before dusk and sat before the door, not in supplication, not in challenge. She simply sat, and then she spoke, not to the door, but to the air. She stayed for 3 days. No one saw her eat or sleep. On the 4th morning, she stood and placed her palm flat against the stone. For the first time in recorded memory, the symbols around the door glowed, a soft blue, like moonlight, caught in deep water. Then they faded, and the door remained shut. Aaliyah walked back through the forest and disappeared. But others came. Each year, 1 or 2 find their way there. Some are dreamers, some are skeptics. All are drawn by something they can't name. They leave offerings, coins, feathers, written confessions. Some whisper names they've never said aloud. Some weep. A few never leave. Locals speak of strange weather above the temple, a circular patch of sky where no birds fly, where lightning sometimes flashes in silence, where clouds freeze in place, unmoving for hours. One pilot reported a mild turbulence while flying overhead, his instruments flickering as they passed the temple's coordinates. He didn't file the report. As for the door, it remains, untouched, unopened, but some say it listens. There's a legend, older than the oldest map, passed down in fragments. It tells of a time when the world will knock not once, but 3 times, not with hand or hammer, but with choice, when humanity will find itself at a crossroads, and the door will decide if we may pass through, or if it must stay closed forever. In that legend, the door is not just a barrier, it is a mirror, a listener, a witness. It does not open to curiosity, only to truth, and truth, as we've learned, is often the last thing we're ready to face. One researcher, a soft-spoken man from a northern university, spent 6 months compiling every known mention of the temple. He traced references hidden in ship logs, footnotes in banned books, carvings found in caves halfway across the world. The same door, the same silence, the same vanishing witnesses. In his final journal entry, he wrote, "I no longer believe it is a door to something. I believe it is the door itself that matters. We have never knocked the right way. Perhaps we were never meant to." He vanished 2 weeks later. His apartment was found empty, his journals burned in a fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. But beside the ashes was a stone, the same green-black hue, smooth, sheenless, cold. It pulsed once, faintly, when touched, and never again. Some say the door is not waiting to be opened. It is waiting for us to close something else, to end a cycle we do not even know we are repeating, that when the final pattern completes, the door will open of its own accord, and we will wish it hadn't. Others believe the door already opened once, long ago, that what came through walks among us now, unnoticed, patient, watching. If that is true, then perhaps the temple is not a prison, but a warning, a monument to restraint, a plea carved in stone. Whatever the truth, the door still stands, alone, waiting, and somewhere, beyond the reach of reason, beyond even belief, there is still a path through the woods, overgrown, forgotten, but there. And if, one day, you find yourself walking it, not knowing how you knew the way, only that you did, remember this. Do not knock unless you are certain. Do not speak unless the silence has spoken first. And above all, if the door opens, do not look inside. Not right away. Let the quiet pass over you. Let the wind return. Let the birds remember how to sing. Then, and only then, decide if the world was ever meant to know what lay beyond the temple door that refused to open until it did. Coins sewn into silence beneath the sea. They say the sea keeps its secrets not by burying them, but by whispering them so slowly over such long spans of time that only those who've forgotten how to listen ever come close to hearing. There is a coastline, not marked boldly on maps, not highlighted in brochures or trail guides, but there nonetheless, where the cliffs are too steep for comfort and the waters below too calm to be trusted. It is the kind of place where birds seem to hesitate before flying inland, and old sea dogs speak not in warnings, but in silences. No legends are shouted here, they're merely withheld. Long ago, or perhaps not long at all, there was a village by that coastline. A salt-bitten cluster of houses, their stone walls clinging to the hillside like barnacles to an aging hull. These weren't people who asked many questions. They lived, harvested, mended, and slept, in rhythm with the tides. What was once questioned, generations before, had long since become a habit of knowing without needing to understand. They didn't speak of the coins. They didn't speak of the old netmaker who lived on the outermost edge, near the cliff path. Or why, on some mornings after storms, you'd find salt-rusted coins woven into fishing nets, as though the sea had paid its dues in offerings of forgotten currency. They didn't speak of the path, down to the cove that only ever seemed to appear at low tide when the moon was thinning. A jagged path, slick with moss, and always strangely dry no matter how hard the waves pounded nearby. No one was told not to walk it, no signs, no fences, yet no child ever did. Not more than once. You wouldn't notice the cove from above unless you already knew it was there, tucked between arms of stone that curled like fingers around a secret. The water inside was glassy, green with age, never truly cold, and beneath it, or so the stories never quite said, were coins. Thousands of them by some counts, all the same shape, all worn nearly smooth, with symbols no one could translate, and a central hole in each one as though meant to be threaded or stitched. But no one could say for certain how they got there, or why they were so deeply embedded in the sands that even the strongest divers could never pull more than a handful at a time. It is said, again, not by anyone in particular, but by the way people glanced down when asked, that long ago, a girl from the village went missing. She'd been known to follow seabirds, drawn by their cries, and her footsteps were often found near the cliff's edge, sometimes closer than seemed safe. But the day she vanished, there were no screams, no crash of waves, only her shoes, left at the beginning of the tide-worn path, and an impression in the sand below that looked almost like fabric. Not torn clothing. A sheet, stretched tightly across the cove floor, just below the water's surface. And on that sheet, though no one dared look for long, were what appeared to be stitches. Dozens, hundreds, each made, not with thread, but with those same smooth-holed coins, pulled tightly together as if they were closing something underneath. Since then, or since before then, depending who you ask, the coins began appearing, not in chests or scattered across beaches, but sewn, woven into fishermen's nets, embedded in the bark of driftwood, found inside the bellies of fish whose scales shimmered faintly with that same strange pattern, rows upon rows of tiny metallic loops. The elders never told anyone not to take them, but no one ever kept them long. Nets would tear, pockets would go missing, and those who pried them loose for safekeeping often reported strange dreams. Dreams where they were underwater, but breathing, held in place not by fear or pressure, but by stitching, something cool and metallic, closing softly around their skin, binding them not with pain, but with purpose. And then, the same thing, always the same thing. A voice, not spoken aloud, but felt like a current around the ribs, asking just one thing. What would you seal to keep something sleeping? Not kill, not bury. Seal. In time the village changed. People left. Some say the fishing dried up. Others say the air began to taste too much like metal. Whatever the reason, the houses emptied, and the cliff path began to crumble. No one tended the netmaker's shack anymore. Though its door never rotted, it simply aged, but the coins remained. Not in great abundance, not enough to form a story you could publish, just enough to never quite vanish. Divers still come now and then, not professionals, they don't bother, but wanderers, curious types who read too many stories in old archives and convince themselves the truth must be simpler than legend. They bring cameras, sonar, magnetometers, some even bring linguists, hoping to decipher the worn marks on the coins. None of them come back quite right. One man, a soft-spoken academic from Oslo, resurfaced pale and shaking. He hadn't even gone deep, just to the edge of the cove, watching the way light refracted beneath the surface. When asked what he'd seen, he didn't respond. He simply drew something on his hotel mirror, using the condensation left from a shower. It looked like a spiral, but with breaks, as if something had been stitched shut around a hole too wide to fill. Another woman, a metal detector hobbyist from Cornwall, came back smiling. Too much. She gave away every coin she found. Said they were lucky. Said they whispered to her when she held them in water. The last anyone heard, she'd built a small raft and was floating alone near that same cove, trailing a net behind her that glittered faintly in the moonlight. And still, the tide never quite washes that place clean. Locals, what few remain, speak less now. They keep their eyes low when tourists ask for directions. The path down still appears from time to time, especially after the moon thins and the wind shifts to the southeast. No signs mark it, just the faint smell of iron, and the way the birds go silent when you near the edge. There are those who believe the coins are a warning, that they were sown as part of a great containment, not to hide something, but to lull it, to make the sea forget its own memory. Others say it's the opposite, that the coins are not to keep something in, but to lure something back, that each one sewn into net or bark or fish scale is a breadcrumb, calling to something that was once forgotten, and now waits. But waits for what? It's the way the stitches pull tight, as if tension remains, even after centuries, as if something beneath the surface is still shifting, just barely, tugging at its bindings with the slow patience of tides. And every so often, a coin turns up in a new place, not near the coast, but inland, in pockets of clothes never worn, in the fold of a curtain that's never been to the sea. In dreams, people wake with an imprint, not pain, just a pressure, like something small and round was resting just above the heart. And when they look closely in the mirror, they swear they see faint lines, loops, as if a stitch had begun but hadn't yet been pulled tight. They say the sea keeps its secrets slowly, but not forever, and some say that when the last coin is sewn, the silence will break, not with sound, but with memory. A memory too old for maps, too wide for books. A memory that sleeps now, still restless beneath the tide, waiting not to return, but to be recognized. And when it is, it won't be with thunder, it will be with a quiet ripple and a question. What would you seal to keep something sleeping? Or more hauntingly, what have you already sewn shut? A Roman soldier's mansion buried by time. They found it by accident. It wasn't marked on any map. No whispers in old records, no crumbling mention in dusty tomes. No hint in the parish archives, just a farmer's complaint about a stone that kept cracking his ploughshare. A stone that, once uncovered, turned out to be tiled, then patterned, then a whole mosaic floor glinting with colour beneath the dirt. At first, the archaeologists thought they had found a Roman villa, a rural outpost perhaps, a provincial station for a minor noble or retiring soldier. But it was too large and too peculiar. It sprawled beneath the earth in unexpected ways, with hallways that curved back on themselves and doors that opened into chambers too grand to have been forgotten. It was less a villa, more a labyrinth with bones of marble and veins of crushed pearl, and in the center of it all was a room that nobody could explain. They called it a mansion for lack of a better word, but the deeper they dug, the less it resembled anything they understood about Roman life, and the more they felt, though few admitted it, that the place had not been abandoned, but buried, deliberately, as if someone long ago wanted it hidden forever. They had no name for the man who had lived there. No statues bore his likeness. No plaques recited his deeds. Only initials carved faintly into a column, TA, and a recurring motif etched into the frescoes and woven into the floor. A serpent coiled around a sword, its mouth open as if in silent command. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Even with generators humming and brushes scraping, there was something heavy in the air, a kind of stillness that pressed against the ears. Birds didn't sing above it. Wind didn't stir the long grass. Time itself seemed to slow the closer one came to the heart of the mansion. Some of the team joked about curses, others stopped joking altogether. What kind of soldier, they wondered, had built a home like this? Why the opulence, the bathhouse large enough to host a crowd, the strange inner sanctum ringed with iron sconces, the doorways shaped not in arches but triangles, and why did none of it appear in Roman records? The deeper they went, the older it felt, not just by age, but by spirit, as if this was not merely forgotten by time, but untouched by it. Coins they found bore emperors whose names were familiar, but the inscriptions were wrong, slightly distorted, Latin that twisted itself when you tried to read it aloud, and the eyes, painted eyes on walls, dozens of them, realistic, vivid, gazing from corners and ceilings. Some frescoes had been plastered over in antiquity, as if even the Romans had found them unsettling. But the strangest thing of all was the central chamber, a domed space lined in black stone, with no windows, only narrow vents, no furniture, no altar, only a single chair carved into the floor, part of the rock itself, and a ring of ash surrounding it, perfectly even, as though placed by design. Beneath the ash, gold coins, dozens of them, each one flattened to a wafer, as if pressed by immense weight. No one wanted to touch them. They sent samples to labs. The metallurgy came back inconclusive, gold mixed with something else, something not typically found in Roman coinage. And the imagery on the coins was disturbing. Not gods, not emperors, just faces, all screaming, not stylized or symbolic, realistic, individual, human. By the third week, people had begun to leave. First it was just excuses, bad weather, family issues, research deadlines. Then it became stranger. One technician walked 7 miles back to the nearest village in the dead of night, barefoot. Another destroyed her camera equipment after claiming she caught something on film that wouldn't stay still. The local farmer who had discovered the site stopped answering his door entirely. The project was put on pause, but the dreams continued. Those who had worked the site found themselves waking at odd hours, hands tingling, ears ringing. A phrase they didn't remember learning, lodged in their minds, domus tacta tempor, the house untouched by time, or perhaps the house that time dares not touch. One of the archaeologists began sketching, not consciously, just idle drawings, while on the phone, or half asleep. Always the same thing, a corridor that bent in on itself like a spiral, lined with mirrors. A man standing at the end of it, back turned, armor etched with scales. They checked the scans of the site. That corridor didn't exist, until it did. A drone sent into one of the as yet unstable wings of the mansion returned footage no one could explain. A hallway, curving right, too long to fit within the blueprint. Shadows that flickered against the drone's light, even when it remained still. And at the far end, a glint. Like metal, they retrieved the drone. The memory card was wiped. The project was shelved, but rumors persisted. The locals, once curious, now wouldn't go near the field. Dogs refused to cross its boundary. One child who wandered too close reported hearing someone whisper in a language she didn't know but understood. The team broke up. Some changed careers, others tried to forget. But there were those who kept digging, not physically, but through records, forgotten libraries, the margins of ancient letters. And they found traces, not many. A few passages in obscure texts, mentions of a soldier who had served not in Rome but beyond the mapped frontiers, far east, or perhaps far south, returning with riches and strange beliefs. A man who had been offered land but chose instead to build a house where none should have stood, who brought back not just artifacts, but knowledge, or something like it. The texts called him Thalamus, a word that means chamber, or in older usage, mind. One fragment, untranslated for centuries, simply read, he returned with a name not his own, and built a house that remembered it. Whatever that meant. Some believed the mansion was not a home at all, but a prison, not for a man, but for something he brought back. Something that slept beneath the stone chair, and the circle of ash, that the flattened coins were offerings, or warnings. Others thought it a monument, not to Rome, but to something older, a belief that predated the empire, that predated memory. The last archaeologist to speak publicly about the site gave a lecture in a small university hall. He showed no slides. Spoke for only 15 minutes. His voice was quiet, strained. There are places, he said, that we did not forget. We were made to forget them. He paused then, and added, It is not the soldier we should be afraid of. It is the house. The house remembers all who enter it. The site remains untouched now, overgrown. The mosaic floor has been buried again, though the ground never quite settled right. Visitors say the wind doesn't blow there. Birds avoid it. And if you stand still, very still, you can hear something soft, like footsteps, far away, echoing through stone halls beneath your feet. Some say it's just the earth shifting. Others say the soldier walks still. But the older villagers, they simply call it the place where silence sleeps standing up, and they do not speak of it after dark. The crocodile-shaped stone that watched the sky. There is a place far from the known maps and beaten trails, nestled deep in a bend of an ancient river, where the sky changes color more often than the seasons, and the birds fly in quiet circles without ever landing. Travelers rarely speak of it, not because it's a secret, but because it's hard to explain. Not frightening exactly, not cursed, but uneasy, like the air itself is watching, like the trees are leaning in, waiting. Locals call it many things: the drowsing stone, the sky drinker, the beast beneath the dust. But its most persistent name, the one etched into old, half-burnt diaries and whispered in the low tones of riverfolk, is the crocodile-shaped stone, a shape carved by no hand, yet unmistakable, a reptilian back, scaled and sun-baked, a snout resting on the banks, as if it had just emerged from centuries of swimming through the stars, a tail that coils not behind it, but beneath. They say it was already old when the first stories were told, that even the oldest tribes, the ones who hunted by starlight and read clouds like scripture, treated it as something that was simply there, never built, never discovered, only found, and rarely approached. The stone itself lies in a small clearing, overgrown but never covered, moss and vine skirt around it, but never take it. Even trees bend subtly away, no tools mark it, no graves surround it, and yet, standing in its shadow, people speak of dizziness, a gentle ringing in the ears, like someone humming in a faraway room, a taste of copper on the tongue, and a strange sense that if you sat beside it long enough, the sky might tell you a secret, but only if you never looked away. No one lives near the stone now. The closest village lies 2 hills over, tucked safely behind a screen of pine and reed. It is not a fearful place, this village. Its people laugh, they harvest, they mend boats, but even the children do not play beyond the 2nd hill, and when asked why, they shrug. It's just something they know, like the way geese know which way to fly. But there was once a time when someone did live close by, a man whose name has been lost, but whose story remains, preserved in fragments, letters, sketches, and a final unfinished journal found in a tin box buried beneath the floorboards of a long collapsed cabin. The villagers never meant to find it. They were planting new barley where the cabin had once stood. The tin box rose up, dirt clinging like memory. When they opened it, it smelled of ink and rust, and something very faintly like thunder. The man had come from elsewhere, the papers said. Not a traveler, but an observer, a geologist perhaps, or an astronomer. His notes were unclear, his handwriting frantic in places. What was clear was this: he had come seeking a thing that could not be photographed, a phenomenon that could only be witnessed. He called it a convergence, a meeting of ground and sky, but also of time. He believed the crocodile-shaped stone was not merely carved by nature, but designed, though not by any known civilization, not by any hand at all. His early entries are methodical: measurements, angles. He draws the silhouette of the stone from above and compares it with constellations. It almost fits, but not quite. He spends a week sleeping beside the stone, noting the temperature shifts, the strange quiet that falls just before dawn. He writes of dreams he cannot remember, only that they leave him with the sensation of being followed through a fog. One entry stands out, dated nearly 3 weeks into his stay. The stone does not watch the sky, it remembers it. There are indentations along the back that match no known erosion pattern. They are too even, too deliberate. When filled with water, they reflect constellations that no longer exist, dead stars or unborn ones. He becomes obsessed, drawings become denser, language starts to slip. He begins referring to the stone not as an object, but as a presence, a her in some places, a beast in others. One entry simply reads, in bold slanted letters, "She does not sleep, she only pretends." The villagers say he stopped coming into town for supplies, that his fire stopped burning at night. One boy, now an old man with clouded eyes, says he once crept close and saw the man sitting on the stone itself, head tilted back, eyes wide, not moving, not blinking, just staring up at a sky that was entirely blank. It was noon. Then came the final journal entry, unfinished, mid-sentence, with the pen stroke trailing off the page. It says only this: I think she is waking up. I think she sees me now. When I stand at her snout, I feel time folding, not like paper, like breath. The clouds, and nothing more. They found the cabin empty. No signs of struggle, no food left uneaten. Just the journal, some maps, and a pair of boots placed neatly beside the bed. But the bed was unslept in, and the boots had dust inside them. No one tried to stay there again. The stone remains, unmoved, unchanged. But there have been stories: a hiker who claimed he lost 3 hours while walking past it, a drone whose footage skipped like a scratched record when flying overhead, and the birds, always circling, never landing, not even to drink from the small pool that sometimes forms near the crocodile's eye when it rains. Some say the stone marks a place where the sky once touched the earth, not in violence, but in union. Others believe it is a kind of recorder, a celestial diary carved in sleeping stone, that its shape is not a crocodile by coincidence, but by purpose, that the ancient people who once roamed this place saw something descend, something vast and slow and older than sun, and gave it a form they could understand. Teeth, scales, a gaze that could freeze the river. There are stranger theories that the stone is a placeholder, not for what is here, but for what is missing, that it mirrors something on the other side of the sky, a twin, or a gate, and that one day, when the right stars align, the two will meet again, briefly, quietly, and everything we understand about time will falter, as if embarrassed. The ground around the stone has small, symmetrical hollows, not footprints, but placements. Depressions, as if something once stood around it, evenly spaced, watching or guarding. They are too round, too perfect to be animal-made, too shallow to be recent, and no vegetation grows within them. There is no record of the stone ever being struck by lightning, despite the area's frequent storms. The villagers note this as odd, but not miraculous, simply peculiar. One old woman insists she saw blue fire roll off its back once, during a night when the clouds didn't move and the crickets fell silent all at once. But no one else saw it, and she later admitted she had been half asleep. Still, she avoids the clearing, even now. In the village, they keep a small wooden carving in the town hall. It's primitive, but unmistakable. The long snout, the ridged back, the eye like a knot in ancient oak. No one claims to have made it. It has always been there. Tourists sometimes photograph it, ask about its origins. The guides smile and tell half-truths. It was an old animal god, they say, a fertility symbol, a protector of the skies, but they never mention the stone, not directly, not unless it's winter, and the river has frozen solid, and the stars are hidden. One young man did try to stay overnight beside it once, a dare. He brought blankets, a flashlight, and a camera. He recorded himself settling in, cracking jokes, said he'd prove there was nothing eerie, that the stories were just dust and wind. In the morning his tent was still there, neatly zipped, the camera was intact, but the man was gone. No signs of struggle, no prints. The only odd thing was this: his footprints led to the stone, but none led away. And yet, one frame of the video, the final few seconds before the battery died, shows something, a flicker. The young man is facing the camera, talking, and then behind him, just for a breath, the crocodile's mouth seems slightly open. It might be a trick of the light, might be, but when the villagers saw it, no one spoke. They turned the camera off, they buried it, and they did not search. Not because they were afraid of what they might find, but because they were afraid of what they might wake. And still the stone lies there, watching nothing and everything, unmoved, unblinking, waiting, perhaps, or dreaming, or remembering the sky as it once was, full of creatures too large to be birds, too silent to be storms, shapes that passed between stars and left no shadow, only questions. And sometimes, if you are still enough, if you hold your breath and listen with something deeper than ears, you may feel it, a subtle pressure in the air, like something impossibly old, just turned its head, just enough to look at you. The clouds part, the wind hushes, and the crocodile-shaped stone continues to wait, as it always has, for the sky to speak again. The Mayan village that shouldn't exist? No roads lead there, not anymore. It's not on most maps. If you ask the elders of nearby villages in the dense, breathless jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, they might lower their voices and tell you of a place where the birds do not sing, where the trees press too close, where the air grows cold even as the sun beats down like a drum. It begins with a dirt path, narrow, uneven, buried in fallen leaves that haven't been disturbed in decades. The jungle has done its best to forget this trail, and for a long time, it succeeded. But then a man arrived, a man who wasn't supposed to find it. Dr. Elias Rojas, a quiet archaeologist from Guatemala City, known more for caution than daring. He wasn't the type to chase legends. He stayed with the documented, the known, the catalogued, until the letter arrived, written in the careful, trembling hand of someone unused to ink. It came from an old man named Santiago who claimed to be the last living descendant of a forgotten Maya lineage. He spoke of a village deep in the jungle, untouched by time, never conquered, never converted, where the people still lived as they had over 1,000 years ago, and they were waiting. Elias didn't believe it, not really, but Santiago had included a map, hand-drawn, incomplete, strangely precise. Something about it whispered to Elias, like an echo down a long corridor. The journey took weeks. The first guides refused. The second set took him part way until the trees thickened and strange calls echoed at night. Then they vanished. Elias found himself alone with Santiago's map and the quiet pressure of vines and moss. But the trail was there, just as the map had shown, twisting, overgrown, wrapped around trees older than any ruin he had ever studied, and it led to a wall, not of stone, but trees, row upon row of cebars and palms unnaturally spaced, unnaturally silent. He stepped between them and found a clearing that shouldn't have existed. A village, stone huts shaped with unfamiliar patterns, a central plaza with no altar, no cross. A pyramid, not tall, but symmetrical, humming faintly as if the stone itself breathed. No signs of modern life, no sounds but the wind brushing the canopy. And then the people came. They emerged from shadows, as if they'd always been there. Barefoot, clothed in woven fabrics, dyed with flowers, with eyes dark and still. They didn't speak, they only watched. Elias waited. One woman finally stepped forward. Her skin was weathered, but her spine was straight as a spear. She took his hand, not to shake it, but to feel it, to press his palm to her forehead. Then she led him to a hut. It was prepared for him, as though they'd known he would come. That night, he didn't sleep. The village made no sound, no drums, no fires, no insects, only the deep, inhuman stillness of stone that's seen too much. When the morning came, he rose to find the villagers assembled. They didn't speak. Instead, they formed a circle around the pyramid and began to hum, a low vibration, not from the throat, but from the chest. A sound Elias felt in his bones before he heard it with his ears. The sound rose, spiraling like smoke, bending the air around the stone structure. He felt time shift. He was shown the carvings, strange, spiraling symbols, nothing like classical Maya script. Santiago had mentioned them. Glyphs that described the world not as it was, but as it should have remained, a timeline that had forked and gone wrong. They believed they were the last village in the true world, that all beyond the jungle was dream and distortion. Elias tried to argue, to explain history, conquest, calendars, science, but they only smiled. The kind of smile you give a child insisting the stars are candles in the sky. They weren't angry, only sad. He stayed for 5 days, each day the same ceremony, the hum, the spiral, the dreamlike stillness, no modern tools, no fire, no hunger. He never saw anyone eat or draw water, yet he never felt thirst or fatigue. Each night, his dreams deepened. He saw other villages swallowed by vines, cities built atop older cities, pyramids upside down beneath the earth, faces watching through cracks in walls, waiting for the right moment to return. On the 6th day they asked him to leave. They didn't speak the words aloud, but the same woman who'd greeted him simply took his hand again and walked him to the tree line. The others followed silently. He turned to ask questions, to stay, to study, to understand. But when he looked back, there was nothing. The village was gone, not hidden, gone. No huts, no pyramid, no footprints, just trees, densely packed, tangled, shifting as the light fell across their bark. Elias staggered out of the jungle 3 days later, barely coherent. A rescue team found him near a dry riverbed with Santiago's map clutched in one hand. They said he was dehydrated, delirious. He'd been missing for 12 days. Back in the city, he tried to find Santiago again. But the address no longer existed. No record of a letter, no envelope, no trace. He returned to the jungle the next year. Same trail, same coordinates. No village. He tried again and again. Each year, always alone, always hopeful. The trees grew thicker. He never found it again, but something had changed in him. He no longer feared death. He no longer slept through the night. He often woke to a humming sound deep within the walls of his apartment. A low vibration, almost familiar. He kept the map framed on his wall. Every morning he'd trace the line with his finger, as if it might shift, as if one day the trail would open again. He began sketching the glyphs he remembered. Hundreds of them, spirals, eyes, hands with missing fingers. He said they were instructions for memory, ways of remembering what the world was meant to be, before history bent the wrong way. In his final lecture before retirement, Elias stood silently for 10 minutes before speaking only one sentence. There are places we don't discover, we remember them. He passed away a year later. No children, no spouse, just his notes and that map. But strange things happened afterward. His apartment was sold. The buyer reported dreams of a humming pyramid. A historian in Merida, who acquired his papers, vanished on an expedition and returned with no memory of where he'd gone. Only a drawing of a village plaza, sketched in a notebook he didn't recognize. And the humming, others began to report it. In museums, in ruins, in jungle clearings where no ruins had ever been documented. Always low, always rising in spirals, always fading before it could be traced. They say there are still villages hidden in the Yucatan, not lost, just remembering differently, waiting for the moment when the world forgets itself enough to see them again. Some call it a myth, others call it a warning. But if you ever find yourself walking a jungle path you don't remember choosing, if the wind stops and the trees seem to lean in just a little too close, be still and listen. You might hear it, that low hum rising beneath your ribs. You might already be carrying the memory of a village you've never seen, a village that shouldn't exist, but does, somewhere beyond time, still waiting. Carvings of camels in a desert with no people. No road led here, not anymore. The desert had swallowed them all. And yet once people had walked, perhaps even ridden, beneath this same blistering sky, leaving behind no bones, no pottery, no ashes, just camels, etched deep into stone, carved into cliff faces in the heart of a desert where no people live and no camels have ever walked. It wasn't on any map, not a real one, anyway. A geologist named Hallam first brought it to notice. Years ago, after a heat distortion led his drone slightly off course, and the shadows on the satellite image didn't quite match the topography. Odd ridges with too much symmetry, strange shadows cast long and low, as if from the backs of animals. When he finally went out to look, he didn't find a fault line or a collapsed hill. He found stone, covered in figures. There were no tire tracks leading in. The team walked the last few kilometers, the grit in their teeth sharpening with every wind gust. They had come to survey rock, but what they found made all their equipment seem crude. It was impossible to explain the scale until you stood in front of it. A cliff, nearly 30 meters tall, rising suddenly from the sand like a memory trying to breach the surface. And on it, camels, dozens, bigger than any real camel, tall as buses, carved in relief so subtly the animals seemed mid-stride, walking eternally in a line toward nowhere. Some looked emaciated, others proud and regal. One bent its neck in a way no real camel ever had. Stretched like a serpent, mouth open not in thirst, but in song or warning. No two were alike, no names, no inscriptions, no language at all, just camels. And silence. It's the kind of place that hushes you even before you realize why. One by one the team stood before the wall. They stopped unpacking, stopped talking, even Hallam. Only the wind spoke now, brushing the cliff like a hand trying to remember a face. No civilization had been known to live here, not close, not remotely. There were no rivers, no caravan routes, no signs of quarries or tools, and still, the camels remained. When they ran their scanners over the stone, it got stranger. The figures were carved not just on the outer surface of the cliff, but into layers of sediment, as if the carvers had peeled back the cliff itself like fruit, working through ancient stone before replacing the outer layers. That was impossible. These were limestone beds millions of years old, and they had been opened, reshaped, and sealed again. seamlessly. The carvings were not weathered, not the way anything else in the desert was. In fact, it was as though the wind respected them, as though sand did not dare strike their surfaces. No scouring, no erosion. Even the delicate lines along the camel's eyes were crisp, like they'd been made yesterday. But that wasn't the most unnerving part. It was their placement. Most carvings you find, ancient or modern, are centered, intentional, framed by the surface. These were not. Some camels had only half a body visible, as if continuing deep into the rock. Others were carved partially upside down, or so high they would have required scaffolding no one could have built in such heat, in such wind. But then, others were too low, too shallow, so low to the ground that no adult human could have worked there comfortably. But the most disturbing ones, those were beneath. The surveyors had brought a ground-penetrating radar, and when they scanned the slope beneath the cliff, they saw lines, horizontal, repeating, not natural, too regular, too deliberate. It was as if the camels continued below ground, walking downward into the earth. The data showed 13 figures buried just beneath the surface. When they began to dig, they didn't find more carvings. They found air, an opening. No cave should have been there. But they cleared the sand and found a vertical shaft, 6 meters wide, lined with carved ledges, not stairs, ledges, as if meant for hooves. The air that came from it smelled old, but not dead, cold, but not stale, and from somewhere far, far below, they heard a scraping sound, like stone on stone. They stopped digging. They marked the site. The next morning, the hole was gone, not filled, gone. The sand didn't collapse over it. It had never been disturbed. They thought they were mistaken, disoriented, but they had photos, video, GPS. Still, the shaft was gone. They never found it again. But every night, as they camped near the cliff, keeping equipment, journals and hard drives locked in cases, they began to hear something, not at once. It started with Halim. He said he heard footfalls, not close, far off, regular, measured, like something walking steadily across a hard surface. He thought it was a jackal or another team member. But when he stepped out of the tent and scanned the dunes, there was nothing, no prints, no wind, just his own heart drumming behind his ribs. By the third night, they were all hearing it, and by the fourth, they'd stopped mentioning it aloud. They left on the 5th day, quietly, respectfully, without even packing everything. They never spoke of it again, until the researcher who inherited Halim's notes looked deeper. She was an anthropologist named Rena, curious, cautious, not one to exaggerate. She'd found the cliff strange, but what fascinated her was a small side note. Halim had scribbled in a margin, "Figures resemble those seen in Canaanite dream rites." That caught her attention. Canaanites had never lived near this desert, but they had rituals, dream rituals, where initiates carved what they saw during induced sleep, often animals, often distorted. These figures were rarely meant for public viewing. They weren't decoration. They were messages, instructions, or sometimes warnings. But these carvings weren't symbols of dreams. They were too real, too detailed. Rena began researching similar reliefs across the world. She found old reports from a ridge in Jordan, a site in northern Saudi Arabia, and a canyon in Iran, all undocumented, forgotten, or dismissed, each with large animal figures carved into rock, each located in places where no settlements had ever been found, and always the animals were moving in one direction, walking, striding, staring outward, always with one missing. There was always one camel missing its eyes, always one. She returned to Halim's site herself. She camped alone, recording sound each night. On the third night, she heard breathing, not hers, not human, slow, heavy, like lungs made of sand. She left at dawn. She thought it might be over, until the dreams began. Camels, always camels, moving in a line. But they weren't walking on sand. They were walking on her ceiling, across her apartment. Hooves scraping drywall, pressing with weight that never cracked the plaster, always in the same order, always with one eyeless, and each morning when she woke, her floors were covered in a fine dust. Limestone. She never went back, but the footage she gathered spread online, quietly, mostly among fringe historians, sleep researchers, and ancient ritualists, and slowly, stories emerged. A man in Algeria who claimed he'd seen the camels in a trance. A woman in Egypt who dreamed of a desert cliff since childhood, before ever seeing an image. A nomad in Oman who'd passed through a valley of stone animals no one else could find again. Each time, the same description. Each time, the same untraceable cliff. And always, they said the same thing. They weren't carvings. They were trapped. The camels weren't etched from stone. They were sealed inside it, somehow fossilized mid-movement. And if you watched long enough, really watched, one of them blinked, not quickly, once every few hours, one blink. Always the eyeless one, which of course made no sense. And yet, the footage showed erosion elsewhere, years later, but not on the camels. The cliff remained untouched by time, and in one night vision drone clip, filmed during a sandstorm, for only a few seconds, you can just barely see one of the figures with its mouth, slightly open, wider than before, almost imperceptibly, as if inhaling. A geologist from Turkey, after seeing this clip, compared it to a vent. He believed the camels were carved as guardians of a geothermal system, a natural breathing point in the earth. But others were less rational. They said the camels weren't guarding anything, they were escaping, slowly, silently, that their motion could only be measured in centuries, that they were walking out of stone, and that someday they'd finish, not to go somewhere, but because they had followed someone in, and they were bringing something out. You can choose not to believe it, many do, but if you ever feel vibrations under your feet, where none should be, if you dream of hooves tapping above your bed, if your ceiling holds dust where none should fall, try to remember, these weren't monuments. They were markers, and the last one has not blinked yet. A city that left without saying goodbye. There is a place that maps remember, but memory does not. A place whispered about in the quiet between ruins, where birds hesitate to fly overhead and compasses spin like startled dancers. No one lives there now. No one remembers when they did. But something remains, neither alive nor dead, only present and waiting. In the northern highlands, where the mountains carve their silhouettes into the sky, shepherds speak in half sentences. When asked about a patch of land that doesn't grow grass, it's a plateau, they say. Flat, dry, barren, but wrong. The animals avoid it. Even the wind seems to skirt around it, as if remembering something that it cannot name. There are no roads that lead to it anymore. The ones that used to have faded into the earth, like veins that stopped pulsing long ago. The few who claim to have reached it always say the same thing. The city is gone, not ruined, not buried, gone. But they describe things they should not know. An arched gateway of copper-green stone, half sunk into the ground. Stairs that lead nowhere, steps worn smooth by feet that no longer walk. A sound, faint and fleeting, like bells submerged in thick water. And then there is the mural. A single wall still stands at the edge of the vanished city. It's cracked and stained, kissed by centuries of weather, but on it is a mural, not carved, not painted, something else. It glows faintly at dusk, when the sun leans low. The figures are strange, men and women in garments that ripple like wind, their faces neither joyful nor sorrowful, simply aware. Each holds a vessel, and each vessel pours out a different substance, smoke, sand, light, water, something that moves. No one knows who made it, but beneath their feet, in the mural, the city is drawn, not as ruins. As it was, tall towers capped with green tile, marketplaces shaded by awnings made of reed and thread, canals glinting like silver veins, and windows, thousands of windows, each one glowing with warmth, each one lit, each one facing the same direction away. It's as though the city were not erased, but left, as though it rose one morning, gathered itself, and simply walked away. There are stories, of course. A desert people that came from the east and vanished just as quickly. A scholar who went blind after spending a night near the mural. A flock of birds that fell from the sky in perfect silence above the plateau. But stories have edges. They start and end. This one doesn't. There's a letter, archived in a university whose name changes often. It's written in an old dialect, barely translatable. It's from a traveler, a cartographer, who claimed to find the city once. He doesn't describe it, not directly. But he writes about a feeling, as if I had interrupted something sacred, not with my footsteps, but with my existence. The city wasn't angry, only aware that I didn't belong. He camped near the mural. He dreamed of voices speaking in unison, not to him, but through him. He writes that they were explaining something, but the words would not settle. They scattered like seeds, and he woke with dirt in his mouth. The letter ends mid-sentence. The land has no name now, not one that remains. Maps from different centuries label it with symbols that don't match. Dots, swirls, question marks. Some leave it blank. One medieval chart labels it with a single word, remora. a bastard Latin term, meaning to remain in delay. Old satellite images show shadows that shouldn't be there, structures too symmetrical to be natural, but not permanent enough to appear again. One image caught the shape of a bridge, only visible at dusk, as if made of light cast backward. The file has since vanished from official archives, but a few researchers still pass it around like a secret, too heavy for a single throat. Why would a city leave? Some say it was never ours to begin with, that it belonged to something older, something passing through, and when its time was done, it folded itself into a corner of the world where time can't follow. Others believe it's still there, just out of reach, not hidden, misaligned, like a memory you almost recall, or a song you've never heard, but somehow recognize. There are theories. Some say the city left because it was lonely, that it had grown tired of being remembered, only in fragments, of having its bones picked over by archaeologists, and its name mispronounced. So it gathered its pieces, and turned toward a place with no mouths to misname it. Others say the city was dreaming, that it never was physical, only the residue of a greater thought, and when that thought ended, when the mind that dreamed it awoke, the city evaporated, like breath on glass. One fragment of a poem survives, etched into a piece of slate found miles from the plateau. It reads, "We built no walls, only thresholds. Our streets were the silence between footsteps. When the stars turned their eyes elsewhere, we did not weep. We walked. There's no attribution, no language it can be traced to. Yet every phone feels familiar, as if it's been whispered to each of us in a sleep too deep to remember." A researcher once tried to recreate the city based on fragments. He used architectural extrapolation, ritual geometry, and comparative myth. He built it from stone and sand, in miniature, a model the size of a dining table. It changed overnight. Windows appeared where none had been carved. The model shifted, rotated slightly, but not by human hands. The researcher recorded a faint tone when standing beside it, like the harmonic ring of glass struck underwater. His notes say he began to dream in a language he didn't know, but understood. The model was destroyed in a fire that left no scorch marks, only a circle of ash. He never rebuilt it, and yet, the plateau remains, still empty, still silent, still avoided. Some say the city comes back, once every century, for a single night, that it sighs itself into being when the stars match a certain pattern, a mirage of memory, a gesture of return. They say you can stand in the center and hear it breathing, that its walls remember the shape of the wind, that its streets echo with footsteps never made, and if you listen closely, you'll hear them. Those who never left, not ghosts, not people, just presences, like the echo of a name you've never heard, but one you know belongs to you. One woman swore she saw children playing near the mural, chasing something she couldn't see. She approached them. They paused, looked at her, not with fear, not with surprise, with recognition, as if she were late to something she had promised to attend. She blinked. They were gone. But on her sleeve, faint and brittle, she found a thread, dyed in a color not found in any spectrum. It shimmered, it wept light, and it crumbled when touched. What kind of city leaves without saying goodbye? One that was never built to stay, one that was only ever passing through this world, like a breeze through open doors. And maybe, just maybe, we're not the ones who were left behind. Maybe we're the ones still arriving. The whale drawn into the dust for the gods. They say the desert remembers everything, even the things no one meant to leave behind. No roads point to the hollow where it lies. No signs bear its name. Maps forget it. Pilots miss it. Satellites see only wind-worn ridges, the color of old bone, and yet in the heart of that barren sweep of nothing, something immense sleeps beneath the sand, silent, patient, and utterly out of place. It is shaped like a whale, not the kind drawn by sailors or stitched onto flags, but older, sleeker, stranger, with a mouth that curves like an arch, and eyes carved into polished stone. No waves ever touched its flanks. No ocean carried its weight. It has no business being there, and yet it is. People do not talk about it. Not the nomads who pass far to the south, not the scientists whose drones lose signal overhead, and certainly not the few old men in desert villages who saw it once and never went near it again. But if you follow the winds, if you watch the shifting dunes long enough, the sand will reveal it to you, just for a moment, like a beast rolling in its sleep, stirring the dust. Some say it was carved, others believe it landed, but most who have seen it with their own eyes agree on this: it was never meant to be found again, not by us. The first known account, though it was never published, came from a British surveyor in 1892. His name was Ellis Orme, and he had been mapping desert water tables for an imperial company interested in railway routes. He never reached his planned destination. His final entry, found in a journal buried under his collapsed tent decades later, reads only, "It sings sometimes, at night, not with sound, but a pressure behind the teeth. I am not alone here. The whale is not stone." Ellis had been alone, or so they thought. His bones were never found. The thing about the whale, if it is a whale, is how completely wrong it feels. People assume ancient statues are either upright or broken. This one is neither. It lies embedded in the sand as if swimming forward. Its flippers are not symmetrical. One is longer than the other. Its spine arches unnaturally, mid-turn. Its tail is a helix, impossible in biology, but graceful in stone. Geologists who examined aerial photos were baffled. The sandstone used for its body does not match the strata beneath, nor does it match anything in the region. It is not native, it came from somewhere else. But where, and why carve a whale in the desert, where no ocean has ever reached? That, of course, is the first question people ask. The second, more troubling one, comes later. Who carved it? Local stories vary. Some call it the god that forgot itself. Others say it was not carved at all, but birthed, that it grew from below, like a fossil uncurling, in reverse. Some elders remember times when the sand rumbled, and strange low frequencies rolled across the earth, like thunder with no sky. Children were born early. Livestock refused to pass the old paths. Dogs howled at midday, and then it stopped, for decades, until the Dutch expedition of 1977. They were archaeologists, 4 in total, looking for pre-Islamic rock art along a newly exposed ravine. They documented several petroglyphs, hands, stars, waves, and then, farther in, what they thought was a massive curved wall. Only when the light shifted did they see the eye, huge, round, glossy, with some kind of petrified resin. It stared from the desert floor. That was the last photo they sent. Satellite images showed their camp remained untouched for weeks, supplies untouched, a single set of tracks left, heading west, not in panic, just one person, walking into emptiness. That person was never found. The whale was buried again 2 days later in a sandstorm. In recent years, urban explorers and fringe historians have tried to locate it again, using thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar. They found hints, ridges where nothing should be, temperature pockets under the sand that hold heat longer than stone should, and more importantly, they found carvings, not just of whales, but of something else, something riding them, or perhaps commanding them. Carvings of figures, long-limbed, robed, eyes too wide, standing in rows on the whale's back, each with a hand raised, each staring at something beyond the carving's edge, a horizon, a star, or maybe something still beneath them, still deeper. One theory suggests it is not a whale at all, but a vessel, not metaphorically, literally, an ark of some kind, not for survival, but for worship, the kind of worship that requires a long journey and a return. In 2021, a man named Dr. Omar al-Harif went missing. He was a cultural preservationist, specializing in desert mythologies, and had spent months tracing tribal songs that referenced the grey mother who hums under the wind. Locals warned him off, told him the place changed your thoughts, made you hear your own voice when you were silent. He wrote his final message to his sister, via satellite phone at 3. There are no doors, but I'm certain it is hollow. I knocked. Something answered. The sound came from inside my ribs. He was never seen again. But a week later, a sandstorm revealed a new portion of the whale, previously unexposed, symbols along its spine, ancient, unknown, but arranged in a way that mathematicians say match Fibonacci intervals, as if the whale was designed not just as sculpture, but as frequency, a device that reacts to sound, or perhaps one that produces it. There are whispers of desert travelers who walk far enough, deep enough, and quiet enough, who say the air changes there, it presses against you, not hot or cold, just full, as if you've stepped into a room where something enormous is breathing just beneath your feet. The wind does not howl there, it speaks, in pulses. And sometimes, if the sun is just above the ridge, and you squint through the haze, you might see the shape of something dark stirring beneath the topsoil, like a shadow learning to rise. No one agrees on its origin. Some believe it is a remnant of a lost civilization that revered creatures of the deep. Others believe it is an alien artifact, disguised in the only form ancient humans might understand. But the most unsettling theory is not where it came from, it's that it's still listening, that somewhere, deep within, something waits. Not buried, not dead, just waiting. In the late 1990s, a desert explorer named Samir Farouk camped near the coordinates believed to be closest to the whale's heart. He recorded 37 minutes of audio before his recorder overheated. The file was mostly static, wind and shifting sand, but at the 29-minute mark, a tone emerges, not a song, not a voice, just a long, resonant note, as if someone or something were exhaling after a long, long time. Spectral analysts found something strange. The note was not one frequency, but many, layered like chords in a forgotten scale. Embedded in those frequencies were fluctuations that, when translated to spectrogram, resembled patterns, and within those patterns, shapes of eyes. Again and again, open, watching, waiting. No formal dig has ever been allowed. The desert reclaims any equipment too close, GPS fails, compasses spin, people vanish, and yet the whale remains, still lying in that blind basin of sand, still stirring whenever the wind crosses it, just right, still bearing the strange carvings of beings not quite human. And if you sleep too near it, they say, you dream of water, black, endless, rising behind your eyelids. You dream of whales that do not swim, but crawl, that whisper in frequencies too deep to hear. You wake thirsty, shaking, and always humming. Not a song, not a memory, but a direction, calling you back. It's still there, somewhere beneath the surface. A whale drawn into the dust, not for us, but for gods no longer spoken of, waiting. The ring you could count with. No one quite remembers when the ring was found. It didn't come with ceremony or awe, not at first. It didn't glitter in the dust or pulse with magic. There were no whispers of kings or curses or anything that warned it was something more than a trinket. It simply turned up, curled in a pocket of earth behind a chapel wall during renovations in a sleepy French village where time walked slower than people did. The workers didn't think much of it at first. A ring of dull bronze, almost green from oxidation, faint ridges along the outer edge like tiny teeth, as though it had once been a gear or part of a machine. It didn't shine. It didn't look valuable. They set it on a windowsill, next to some ceramic shards and a Roman nail, where it sat quietly for hours in the cooling light. And then someone touched it. Not deliberately, just brushing by, really, fingertips grazing the ring's surface while moving something else. But it was enough for the man to stop, to pause and furrow his brow. He said, "I thought I was forgetting something," and stood there, unmoving, as though the room had changed shape. He didn't say what it was he remembered, only that it felt sharp, like something had clicked back into place. The ring was moved that evening, placed into a plastic bag and labeled with the others, but the air around it never felt quite the same again. A week later it was sent to a regional archaeologist, along with several more noteworthy finds. But by then the ring had begun, doing something. Quietly, subtly. It wasn't magic, or if it was, it didn't announce itself. There were no visions, no heat, no glow, just a creeping change in the way people counted things. The intern who catalogued the ring noticed it first. She had a habit of counting tiles in the floor whenever she was bored, rows of square terracotta, dozens of them. But after a few days, she began counting in circles, not numbers, not really, more like loops. She described it later as rounds of thought, like every idea had a rotation, and you could feel it tick by, like seconds on a clock you couldn't see. The ring itself had no writing, but it had those ridges, 37 of them, spaced unevenly, not symmetrical, not decorative, not Roman or Gallic, or Christian, but deliberate, measured, like the kind of tool that doesn't tell time, but counts something else. No one could guess what. It was during an idle moment in the lab that someone slipped it on. He said it was instinct, he hadn't even realized what he was doing, just slipped the ring over his thumb without thinking, only to jolt back as if struck. The ring didn't hurt him, but he dropped it immediately. Said it felt like something had taken a breath through his hands. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because of dreams, he didn't have any. That was the problem. He lay awake, eyes open, and felt the minutes pass by, not in thoughts or movements, but in silent, perfect counts. 37, again and again. Like a metronome nested in his ribs. He said the air felt like it pulsed. The next day, he tried to laugh it off. But the woman next to him asked if he had noticed the lights in the room had begun blinking in odd intervals. 37 seconds on, then darkness. He said it was probably a faulty timer. But it kept happening. Weeks passed, the ring was passed through several hands, not worn again. Not after the technician's hands began to tremble when he held it too long, or the janitor who refused to clean the room where it was stored, saying the clocks won't stop. No one quite knew what he meant. It wasn't clocks. There were no ticks, no noise. But every person who encountered the ring described a sense of rhythm. Some likened it to a heartbeat, but not theirs. Others described it more like a countdown, except it never ended. It counted 37, then began again. 37, then again. Theories emerged. Some said it was a ritual object, others a kind of measuring tool, maybe for trade or astronomy. But the counts didn't match lunar cycles, or coins, or weights, or ancient calendars. It was an odd number, prime. It didn't fit. One linguist noticed that if you whispered while touching the ring, the echoes in the room didn't behave as they should. Your words would hang just a moment longer than they ought to, stretching into an odd reverb, not audible to others. Just something you felt in your chest, like your voice wasn't finished even after it stopped. It got worse. The lab developed problems with storage logs. Not errors, just confusion. Items would be checked in, only to vanish. Not stolen, not misplaced. Just gone, no record. But then they'd reappear a few days later, right where they were supposed to be. It was like they'd been counted out of existence, and counted back in. The ring had not moved, yet it had become central. People visited the room more often, stared longer, said less. There was something about it, not hypnotic, not charming, just present, unshakably present, like it remembered you even after you left. The intern started keeping a journal. She described dreams filled with turning wheels, not gears, not machines, just round things, turning, always 37 spokes, always 37 spokes. Some of them rotated clockwise, others didn't move at all, but they were always watching. The ring, she wrote, is not a thing. It is a place. That line was underlined twice. She was dismissed shortly after for stealing the ring and taking it home. She returned it the next morning, quietly, with no explanation. But she had changed. She didn't speak in full sentences. She used numbers instead, not to count things, just to refer to them. Her cup became 12, her bag 15. No one could make sense of it. When questioned, she simply said, "That's what it told me." The ring was placed in storage after that, locked in a vault for sensitive artifacts. There was discussion about destroying it, but no one followed through. The museum, which had since taken custody of the artifact, received a sealed envelope a few months later. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a cave painting from Saudi Arabia, one showing concentric rings drawn into stone, 37 notches, carefully etched, older than cities, older than writing. Along the margin, a note in delicate cursive. They did not wear it, they obeyed it. That was when the name began, though no one knows who said it first. The Counter's ring. Some archaeologists began collecting other ring-like objects to compare, from burial sites, temples, and unknown contexts. Bronze ones, stone ones, carved ones. A handful showed similarities, ridges, subtle notches. None had inscriptions, but all seemed tied to places where time felt strangely layered. One, from a dig in northern Britain, was found inside a burial cairn, placed not on the finger of the deceased, but embedded in the chest cavity, directly over the sternum. Some believed it was meant to replace the heart. Another was found buried beneath a ziggurat in Mesopotamia, intact, but melted slightly, as though from intense heat. It had 37 indentations. A third was found inside a sealed vase in Peru, wrapped in hair, also 37 ridges. None of the sites shared cultural overlap. The museum's ring, the first one, remained undisturbed for a long while. But then the storage logs changed again. This time, not by accident. Someone had relabeled it, not as an artifact, but as a mechanism. That label stuck. It was enough to prompt a new theory, that the ring wasn't for decoration or ceremony, but for interaction. That it was never meant to be worn on a hand, but placed, seated, activated. The problem was, no one knew what it activated. An engineer was consulted. She took a mold of the ring and noticed that, if placed on a smooth surface, it always rolled in a perfect circle, no wobble, as though it had been tuned, balanced. She said it reminded her of ancient balancing rings used in early astrolabes. but with no markings. She asked what the 37 ridges aligned with. No one could answer. She ran some tests. She played tones near the ring, frequencies, vibrations, and discovered that at certain pitches, the room itself seemed to quiet, not go still, just less full, like sound had been measured out of it. That night, she went missing. Her car was found outside the building. Her tools were still on the table, but her phone, when recovered, contained a single audio recording, 37 seconds long. It was the sound of counting, not in words, but in low clicks, mechanical, rhythmic, click, pause, 37 clicks, then silence. She never returned. The ring was moved again, this time to a remote facility. There are stories unconfirmed that it was studied by people who didn't answer to museums, that other rings were brought in, compared, assembled even, that together, they formed not a puzzle, but a calendar, not of days or seasons, but of return, a way of counting down, not to an event, but to a recurrence. A historian once whispered, not when they came, when they come again. What they refers to is unclear, but if you look closely, if you begin counting odd things in your life, seconds that go unremembered, footsteps that seem to echo more than once, or moments that replay in perfect loops, you may already be near one of the rings, you may already be counted, and the number is always 37, but the meaning, still unknown, still counting. A temple woven from forgotten faiths. It stood where maps once curled away in confusion beyond the windswept plateaus, where rivers forgot their own names and stars seemed to drift too slowly overhead. No caravan had passed that way in living memory. No path led to it, nor away. And yet, there it stood, the temple. There was no name for the stone structure in any known language, and no village nearby that would have built it. But even now people speak of it in half-formed warnings, passed from mouth to mouth like a tune remembered from a dream, never sung in daylight, never repeated twice. The first written account came from a surveyor in the late 1800s, hired to chart an uninhabited stretch of salt flats somewhere between the Zagros foothills and the shifting desert. He made no mention of the temple directly, only that he had seen something old, and so impossibly still that I feared it had been waiting. The note was tucked into the back of his field journal, just a single sentence scribbled in the margins, followed by pages of erratic pen marks, curves, loops, crude symbols that did not match any known script. His company never received the final map. He never returned. That was not the last mention. Archaeologists, explorers, and seekers drawn by that same magnetic thread began to whisper about an unmapped ruin, surrounded by winds that spoke in tones of warning. No one arrived on purpose. The temple found you, if it wished to. Its architecture was impossible to categorize. From one angle, it seemed Babylonian, with stepped terraces and worn reliefs of hybrid beasts. From another, its walls flowed like Buddhist stupas or Mesopotamian ziggurats blurred into memory. The stone itself was unlike anything found in the region, smooth to the touch, yet marbled with vein-like channels that glimmered faintly under moonlight. No two accounts describe it the same way. For some it was a shrine surrounded by shattered statues, as if something had tried to erase all faces from history. Others described intricately woven columns, made not of stone but of a petrified wood, no longer found on earth. One group swore the interior smelled faintly of sandalwood and wet clay, though no trees or water had touched the region in centuries. And always, there was the sound. Not wind, not echo, but a tone that drifted just outside hearing, like a bell that had once been rung long ago and refused to stop resonating. They said that once you stepped inside, time felt strange. There were no clocks, of course, but the sun didn't seem to move right, and shadows fell in directions they had no reason to. People emerged hours or days later, confused and whispering strange things. Some had forgotten why they had entered at all. Others wept, wordlessly, unable to describe what they had seen. A linguist once entered the temple with a notebook and an old tape recorder. She was interested in the symbols reported on the inner walls, scripts that no culture could claim. She left her equipment behind and was found 3 days later wandering barefoot miles away. When asked what had happened, she said only, "They wrote it before we spoke. They carved prayers no one remembers how to answer." Her tape recorder, when reviewed, was full of static, except for a low hum, rhythmic, like breath drawn through stone lungs. Every 17 minutes, a faint voice recited something, soft and distant, but the words didn't match any language known to humankind. Another visitor, a scholar of comparative religion, tried to photograph the altar. He'd brought an old Polaroid and snapped 3 shots, but each photo, though taken from the same angle, came out different. In one, the altar was empty. In the second, there were shapes, humanoid, faint, hunched over it. In the third, only shadow remained, and the shadow stretched out of frame in a way that didn't obey light. He didn't keep the photos. He burned them by the campfire that night and left without looking back. No institution has ever formally studied the temple. No foundation funded a full excavation. The region remained unclaimed, unbothered, and deliberately avoided. Local herders changed their grazing routes to skirt the area entirely. Children were told to never follow the wind that came from the northeast. That's where the air forgets itself, they'd say. Some believe the temple is older than civilization, older than language, a place built not for gods, but before gods. Its symbols, when examined, do not speak of worship, but of memory, specifically the loss of it. Whole walls are carved with spiral patterns, fractal shapes, and figures that seem to dissolve as the eye follows them, as if you are meant to forget them the moment you see them. An anthropologist once proposed that the temple was a convergence site where early proto-faiths bled into each other before solidifying into myth. A place where belief hadn't yet been shaped into doctrine, where offerings weren't made to specific deities, but to the concept of remembrance itself. He claimed the altar had layers, not physically, but conceptually, that each visitor perceived something different, based on what they had unknowingly left behind in their lives. A loss, a regret, an unanswered question. The temple gave shape to it, not as comfort, not even as punishment, but as a mirror polished by time. He too disappeared not long after sharing his theory. All that remained was a half-written manuscript, and a map drawn entirely in charcoal, with no legends, no compass, and no borders. Only a central spiral, surrounded by what looked like hands, open, reaching, eroding. A strange phenomenon was later reported by a satellite pass in the early 2000s. Anomalous heat signatures flared for only a few seconds over a patch of land previously thought barren. A pattern appeared, circular, with intersecting lines and flaring nodes like an abstract star map, then it vanished. Attempts to photograph it later showed nothing. No vegetation, no ruins, nothing. But one analyst, reviewing the data, found that the pattern perfectly matched carvings from the base of the temple described in a 1937 explorer's sketch, an explorer who had no access to aerial views. So what is the temple? Some say it was never built, that it grew organically over centuries, absorbing faiths, memories, and forgotten fears, that it is less a place and more a tether to something else. Not malevolent, not benevolent, just enduring. A keeper of things left behind. Others claim that those who enter and do not return have not perished, but remained. Not as people but as thoughts carved into the very stone, their presence contributing to the slow erosion of time within those walls. Every whisper heard in the silence, every shifting shadow, every breath of wind with no source, they are part of it now. It's said that on certain nights, when the moon hangs too low and the stars crowd too close, the temple sings. A low, layered chant that vibrates the stones and unsettles nearby animals. No words, no melody. Just the echo of countless tongues trying to remember something no longer spoken aloud. And sometimes, just sometimes, you may find a symbol from the temple in the corner of an old book, etched on the back of a coin, or painted in ochre behind a crumbling wall in a ruined church. As if fragments of it slip through reality when no one is looking. As if the temple is still writing itself, one forgotten faith at a time. And if you dream of it, if you ever wake with sand in your shoes or spirals drawn on your window in the dew, don't try to go looking for it. Don't chase the wind that smells faintly of incense and salt, because the temple doesn't want to be found. It chooses who remembers, and it always remembers who forgets. The cave that held a stage and a curse. It starts with a rumor, not a grand one. No, nothing screamed across headlines or carved into the pages of some ancient trembling manuscript. Just a quiet thing, passed between mouths in the warmth of small fires, or over dusty bottles in places where the floors never feel quite level. A murmured thing, about a cave, a stage, and something left behind. Something that should never have been seen, and certainly never heard. The place has no official name. Maps don't mark it, and the locals, when they speak of it at all, do so with glances over their shoulders, like they expect the shadows to eavesdrop. If they call it anything, they call it the Hollow Theatre, or sometimes, more bitterly, the Mouth that never closes. It's somewhere in the limestone hills that roll between forgotten borders. The path to it is not a trail so much as a memory of one, overgrown with grasses that sigh like they've been waiting centuries to be disturbed. Even before the cave comes into view, there's a strange stillness, birds stop singing, insects vanish, and the air begins to feel thick, like it's watching you. Then the entrance appears. It isn't grand. You'd expect something vast and gaping from the stories, but it's just a slit in the rock, wide enough for a single person. But the stone around it is smooth, too smooth, worn down not by wind nor water, but perhaps by centuries of something passing in and out, brushing against the edges like breath on skin. Inside, the walls narrow at first, and the air grows colder in a way that doesn't make sense for the depth. It's not the cold of geology, but of absence. A deliberate kind of emptiness. The path curves, slightly, and then opens into a space that is wrong. It's a cavern, but not like any natural chamber, perfectly circular. Its edges rise like the tiers of an amphitheater, carved steps and low seats arranged in concentric rings. The floor is flat, smooth as polished obsidian, but made from dark stone that drinks light instead of reflecting it, and at the center of it all, raised slightly, is a stage. It's stone too, but worn at the center, like thousands of feet have paced across it, or danced, or worse, no one knows who carved it. There are no inscriptions, no offerings, no bones or relics to explain who it was meant for, and yet when you stand there, it feels used. Recently, as if someone has only just left, ducked out behind the curve of the wall, and slipped into silence. The strangest part isn't even the design, it's the sound. The moment you step into the space, every breath echoes, but not naturally. It echoes back with a fraction of a delay that's just off, just slow enough to make your skin crawl. Some claim that if you whisper a name into that chamber, it doesn't come back as your voice. It comes back, older, colder, like a version of you that waited in that cave far too long and learned to speak differently. Locals say that sometimes in the blue hours before dawn, you can hear something coming from the hills, a hum, a low, constant murmur, like voices tuning for a performance that never begins. A few swear they've seen shadows against the sky, shapes moving along the ridges, though there's no wind, no torches, no audience to watch what isn't happening. There's an old story about a troupe of traveling performers who went missing near that place. Supposedly, they were last seen a day's walk from the cave, laughing and juggling as they passed a town square. No one remembers their names now, but when people talk about the cave, they say the acoustics in that chamber changed not long after, became deeper, fuller, as if the walls learned new rhythms to hold. A handful of explorers have tried to study the site. Some made it in, mapped it, recorded their impressions, but every single one of them left abruptly, some without their gear, some without their voices. One wrote only a single line in his field notebook. The applause never ends. He never explained what he meant. There are carvings now, faint and small, at the back of the chamber, ones no one remembered seeing before. Not letters, just repeating patterns of masks. Always the same face, wide eyes, open mouth, not smiling, not screaming, something in between. The sort of expression that makes you feel like someone's laughing behind you, but you can't turn fast enough to see. And beneath each mask, something stranger, not names, but numbers, sequences etched small, impossibly small, in a spiral that tightens toward the mask's mouth. Some believe if you read them aloud, they form a kind of script, a script for a play no one remembers, or that no one survived. A geologist once tried to study the stone. He said it shouldn't exist. The mineral makeup was unfamiliar, but not extraterrestrial. It was as if the stone had grown under pressure in a place where time moved sideways, not forward. He tapped the central stage with a hammer once, only once. The sound echoed for exactly 13 seconds, but not as a single tone. It changed pitch, like something was mimicking the note, playing with it. He left the next morning, wouldn't talk to anyone. Retired within a week. There's another story, older than the rest, about a shepherd who found the cave by accident. He heard his sheep bleating from within, and went looking. When he stepped inside, he said the walls were covered in moss, moss that moved when he wasn't looking. He walked the edge of the chamber, and saw no stage at all, only a pit, a circular one, wide and deep. He leaned forward and heard laughter coming up, from far, far below. He came back with torches the next day. There was no moss, no pit, only the stage. They say he stopped tending animals after that, took up building instruments, but none of them could be tuned. It's not just the stories that linger though, it's the people who've gone silent after visiting, journalists who stopped writing, archaeologists who never filed reports, tourists who returned with voices hoarse from shouting. though no one could remember hearing a sound. And always, they leave behind something small, a mask, a shoe, a torn piece of parchment with no ink, all in that same circular chamber, all placed neatly near the stage. There's a theory, one not often repeated, that the cave is less of a place and more of a wound, a kind of bruise on the world, where the boundary between performance and reality thinned too far, and now everything echoes, every footstep, every breath, every choice. What was once just a stage for telling stories became a story that tells itself. If you stand at the center and close your eyes, some say you can feel the audience, not see, never see, but feel. A weight pressing in around you, not people, presences, as if the cave is holding its breath, waiting for a line that was never delivered. And when you leave, if you leave, you carry something with you. Not a curse, exactly, just an itch, a whisper in your bones, a sense that somewhere something is listening, waiting, rehearsing, and maybe, just maybe, someday you'll return. Not as a visitor, but as the next act. The girl buried with bowls and no headstone, no name, no date, no stone, only a hollow in the soil, and the bowls, 4 of them, ringed around her like quiet watchers. When they found her, no one knew who she was. Not the archaeologists, not the villagers who had walked the field for generations, not the maps or the records or the whispered family tales. The land had swallowed her gently, and time had folded around her like fog, leaving no clues. Only these bowls, unglazed, hand-shaped, and oddly intact. No pattern, no pigment, just clay and silence. The story begins where the road forgets to go, somewhere in the hills, far from cities, and deeper than most memories run. A cluster of low mounds ripple across a slope, looking like nature's breathing, not quite hills, not quite graves. The locals call them the tucked ones. Old farmers say the land is shy here, keeping its secrets pressed close to its chest. When a summer drought cracked the earth, a patch of unfamiliar soil caught the eye of a herder passing through. He nudged at it with the toe of his boot and felt something shift, a sudden softness beneath the hardened crust. Within weeks, a small team of researchers arrived, spurred by little more than curiosity and the odd suggestion of a boundary line that hadn't existed on any document. They expected the usual, a bit of charcoal, broken pottery, maybe the edge of a forgotten hearth. But instead, they uncovered her, or, more precisely, they uncovered around her. She hadn't been buried like others. There was no coffin, no stone markers, no grave goods save the bowls. Her bones were arranged with care, but in a posture unfamiliar, neither the straight solemn repose of Roman burials, nor the curled fetal form of earlier pagan rites. Her arms were drawn slightly upward, her palms open as if catching something, her legs bent, one heel pressed close to her hip, and around her, north, south, east and west, those bowls, unglazed, empty, no inscriptions, no carvings, no metal, no jewelry, no cloth. Even her teeth had worn in ways that didn't quite match the time they assumed she came from. Not malnourished, not aristocratic, not anything they could explain. She was healthy, mid-teens, and her bones held none of the marks of violence or disease. There were no signs of illness, no ancient fracture or lingering injury, just her, alone, hidden. And those bowls, some say it's the bowls that made the archaeologists uneasy, not because they were there, but because of how unusual they were in their ordinariness. Clay like this should have crumbled over centuries. These hadn't. They were hard to date. No organic residue inside, no soot, no grain, not even the faint scratch of a tool. When one researcher picked one up, they remarked on how cold it felt, despite the sun. Another said they felt like they were holding a held breath. The site was remote, but not untouched. A shepherd's path ran nearby, and an old chapel ruin stood just a mile downslope, abandoned since the 1600s. Yet in all the oral histories, in all the land ledgers and friars' writings, there was no mention of a girl buried in the field. Nothing about ritual graves, no local saints, no plague burials, and certainly no bowls. One woman from a nearby village came forward quietly. Her grandmother, she said, had once told her that some places in the hills don't want company. She remembered being told not to follow a certain line of trees that curved along the ridge. That land has already chosen, the old woman had whispered. She hadn't understood what it meant as a child. Now she wondered if the girl was who the land had chosen. A few days after the excavation began, the team's equipment began acting strangely. Batteries drained faster than usual. GPS pings failed. The little orange flags marking the grid would disappear overnight. One morning, a square of the dig grid had collapsed in on itself, as if someone or something had pressed down gently from above. Still, they worked, they documented, they measured and brushed and mapped and labeled, but no one gave her a name. She became specimen B7, not because she was the seventh body found, but because she was unearthed at point B on day 7 of the dig. B7, a catalogue label, meant to make her easier to reference in reports. But one junior researcher began to call her something else. The Gatherer. When asked why, she only said that she had dreamed twice of a girl holding out her hands, not to receive but to collect. Not food, not gifts, just presence. Like someone cupping still air. The dig site was closed by autumn, as rains returned and made the slope unstable. The girl was carefully removed, the bowls packed separately, and all were taken to a nearby university for further analysis. Tests were inconclusive. Radiocarbon estimates fluctuated wildly. One fragment of the bowl dated to 800 AD, another gave a range in the 1200s. One bone showed a window in the 10th century, another suspiciously modern. It didn't make sense, it shouldn't have made sense. A forensic pathologist was brought in to consult. After hours studying the remains, he emerged with furrowed brows and a single sentence: "She doesn't fit." That was all. The bowls were placed in storage, then brought out again, handled, photographed, scanned. They never cracked, never chipped, even under conditions that damaged surrounding artifacts. The bowls remained, still, not pristine, still, as if they had always been there, waiting. A visiting historian suggested the burial might have been symbolic, a local tradition that had vanished, a ritual reenactment, a kind of memory prayer, but that didn't explain the posture, or the lack of context. No echo, one archaeologist said. There's no echo of this anywhere else. And then there was the humming. It happened only twice, once during a power outage at the lab. A low vibration, not audible exactly, but felt in the feet, in the back of the teeth. The staff blamed the generator, but the generator wasn't running. The second time, it happened in the archive room. A researcher reached for one of the bowls and froze. She said it was like the air itself had paused, that a low frequency had started to rise, but never peaked. She placed the bowl back, and it stopped. Later that night, she dreamed of a field where bowls had grown like mushrooms. The girl was there, but her eyes were hollow, not empty, hollow, as if something had been taken. The researcher never went back to the site. No curse was declared. No headlines made the news. The girl B7, the Gatherer, faded back into quiet archives. The bowls were catalogued. The report was published, dry and inconclusive. But some details didn't make it into the official record. Like how the grass never grew back properly on the excavation spot, or how drones malfunctioned above that part of the ridge, or how an intern who touched all 4 bowls in sequence began speaking in a language no one could place and couldn't recall doing it after. That intern left the program, or how the chapel ruin down the slope had a carving, long eroded, of 4 shapes arranged around a central form, circles around a kneeling figure, bowls, possibly, but the carving was so weathered, no one dared guess. Except the old woman from the village. When shown a photo, she murmured, "Still waiting." When asked what she meant, she looked at the researcher and said, "She wasn't buried, she was planted." A pause. Then she added, "Some seeds bloom without sound, and maybe that's what the bowls were. Not offerings, not containers, not markers. Maybe they were the roots, or maybe they were listening." Some say objects carry memory. That clay remembers the shape of hands that shaped it. That places remember footsteps. That silence, in the right soil, grows echoes. And in the quiet hills where the road forgets to go, 4 bowls still wait in a university vault, untouched, unbroken, but not unnoticed, because sometimes when the room is still, when the world is too quiet for comfort, someone thinks they hear a girl breathing in. The coins that whispered through rust and fire, they were found under the floorboards of a chapel that hadn't heard a prayer in centuries. Not in a treasure chest, not in a burial mound, not hoarded in panic, or offered in ritual. The coins had been sewn into fabric, folded into the lining of an old woolen garment that no longer existed, threads long vanished, leaving only the flattened circles of silver and a ring of darker earth where metal had kissed soil for far too long. No one could say who had placed them there. No one even remembered the chapel. Not really. It had sunk halfway into the earth. Its steeple collapsed into a slow, wordless bow. Moss crept along the crumbling stones as if trying to erase it, leaf by leaf. The floor had caved in on one side, and the altar was just a suggestion, a bare stain of wax and ash. But when the archaeologists cleared the dust and time from the back wall, they found the flooring slumped oddly, as if someone had once stood there, day after day, always in the same place, until the weight of them pressed down into the wood and through it. Beneath that strange, worn patch under centuries of compressed soil lay the coins. There were 27 of them, all different, all minted in places separated by rivers, seas, and languages. A coin from the reign of a forgotten Balkan prince, one from a trade port that had burned in 1172 and never recovered, another struck in the year a distant king was crowned, though no crown had ever touched his head. They were gathered there as if chosen, each one whispering of a separate war, or famine, or betrayal. Each one still held the heat of its forging. No record explained them, no ledger, no tradition of storing wealth this way, especially not coins from so many ages and places. But what unsettled the researchers most wasn't their strangeness, or the silk ghosts of their wrapping. It was how the metal felt, cold in the sun, warm in the dark. Coins were never supposed to do that. They were catalogued, tested, weighed. Every scratch was mapped, every inscription translated, or at least attempted. But one detail kept slipping through the cracks, unnoticed, until someone saw the coins arranged together for photography, on a velvet cloth, side by side, in the order they were found. It wasn't the design, or the patina, it was the sound. When the coins were laid in the same pattern, always the same, and left untouched, they gave off a faint resonance, not quite music, not quite a vibration, just a low, brittle hum, like something ancient remembering how to sing. And if you listened closely, it wasn't the same tone every time. Different listeners described different sounds. One swore it was the tolling of bells from a church that didn't exist. Another said it sounded like a crowd murmuring in Latin, then fading. A third, trembling, said she heard someone repeating her childhood name, in a voice she hadn't heard since her grandmother died. They moved the coins to a secure facility, but the whispers followed. Locked in a sterile lab, the resonance continued, not through speakers or equipment, just through presence. One intern walked past the viewing case and dropped his clipboard. He claimed he heard weeping inside the glass. Another fell asleep beside the coins during an overnight shift, only to wake up with soot on her palms and a word scrawled into her notebook that she didn't remember writing. Again, the lead archaeologist, at first skeptical, began to visit the coins late at night, alone. He claimed he was looking for patterns, but eventually he stopped documenting anything at all. When asked about the coins, he'd go quiet, gaze distant, and say only, "They know." The lab lights began to flicker, cameras shut off on their own. Every attempt to photograph the coins after dusk returned blurry, as if something had passed between lens and lens. One staff member quit abruptly after claiming she saw a hand in the reflection of the coin case, a hand made of ash and wire. Then there were the fires. They never started near the coins directly, but always nearby. A pile of papers igniting in a locked filing cabinet. A stack of storage boxes catching flame with no power source nearby. It happened 5 times in 6 months. Not large fires, not destructive, but precise. Always near a record about the coins. Always erasing just one layer of data, and always leaving behind the faint scent of burning wool. A coin specialist from Istanbul was brought in to consult. She'd seen similar caches at least, similar in composition, mixed sets of old currency, brought together for symbolic or protective reasons. But when she examined these coins, her face went still. These weren't chosen to protect, she said. They were meant to warn. Warn what, or who? She wouldn't say more. She left that same night, and wouldn't answer emails. One of the last attempts to decode the coins came from an acoustics professor who insisted the hum could be measured, that it was a form of infrasound communication, like what elephants or whales use. He mapped the frequencies, layered them, slowed them down, and discovered something terrifying. The coins were not emitting sound, they were refracting it. The whispers, the names, the bells, the ghost voices were not inside the coins. They were bouncing off them. Like sonar off a deep wall, something was speaking. From the other side, it's unclear what happened next. The recordings were wiped. The professor disappeared for 2 weeks, then re-emerged, pale and disoriented, wandering through a train station. He refused to speak about the coins. He refused to speak about anything at all. The final note entered into the excavation log was short. The coins are not currency, they are memory. That was the end of the research. The coins were quietly removed from public study, placed into a museum archive so remote and secure that even its name wasn't disclosed. The chapel where they were found has since collapsed completely. When a new team tried to survey the area, they found the landscape had shifted. The stonework was gone. The soil, blackened. The trees nearby bore scorch marks. No wildlife in the vicinity. The air smelled faintly of smoke and oil. A local, when asked about the chapel, looked confused. "There was never a chapel there," she said. "Just the old ruin that burns itself down every few years." She said it as if it were normal, and when shown a photo of the coins, she flinched. "I've seen one of those before," she said. "My grandfather had one, sewn into his coat when he came back from the war. Said it saved his life once. Said it nearly took it another time." When asked where the coin was now, she said she buried it with him. Didn't want it waking up again. And that may be the only clue we're left with, that these coins were never meant to be used. That they were made, gathered and hidden not for wealth, but as reminders of something that speaks through silver. Something that carries voices and fire and a long dark memory of the world we used to be afraid of. If you ever find one, tarnished, odd, out of place, stitched into a coat or lying alone in a box where no coin should be, don't polish it. Don't flip it, don't try to listen, because it already knows your name, and it is waiting for the silence between your breaths to whisper something back. Some mysteries erode with time. Others only grow louder in the silence. From sundials hidden in plain sight, to temples that still breathe forgotten prayers, we've only just brushed the dust off the surface. Thanks for exploring with Unearthed Secrets. If you enjoyed the journey, leave a like, subscribe, and let us know your favorite mystery. And before you go, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Until next time, stay curious.